I never thought I'd see the day when someone would be so entitled they'd block a funeral procession, but Oakwood Estates has a way of redefining the word outrageous. For 3 years, I've lived under the dictatorship of Karen Wilkinson, our self-appointed HOA president, who made it her mission to terrorize the neighborhood with violation notices over lawn edges and mailbox paint chips. Clipboard in hand, badge she printed herself at a local shop swinging proudly from her neck, she patrolled our streets like she was running a prison camp. But last Tuesday, she finally crossed a line no one thought even she would dare. It was a quiet, somber morning. Mr. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor, had passed away after a long, difficult fight with cancer. A decorated veteran who had lived in Oakwood Estates longer than most of us, he'd asked that his funeral procession pass through the neighborhood one final time. His family arranged everything with local authorities, permits, police escorts, everything done by the book. We gathered along the sidewalk to pay our respects. It wasn't just a farewell. It was the least we could do for a man who had served his country with dignity. But dignity doesn't seem to exist in Karen's vocabulary. She marched down the sidewalk like a general inspecting troops. Same stiff khaki pants, HOA logo polo shirt, and that lanyard badge flapping in the breeze. The moment I saw her scowl, I knew something was about to go terribly wrong. She looked at the group of us standing quietly and demanded, "Why are you loitering? This is against community guidelines. Section 4.3 clearly prohibits congregating on common areas without board approval." Mrs. Abernathy, our kind, frail neighbor, tried to explain. "It's for Mr. Jenkins. His funeral procession. They'll be passing by any minute now." Karen's eyebrows shot up like she'd been personally insulted. "A funeral procession? Through our neighborhood? Who authorized this? As HOA president, I wasn't consulted. This disrupts traffic flow. There are protocols for this sort of thing." I couldn't help myself. "Karen, it's a funeral. His family has permits, and they've coordinated with the police. No one needs your blessing." She turned to me with that fake smile she saves for people she hates. "Mr. Harrison, I don't believe I was speaking to you. And in case you've forgotten, any organized activity impacting traffic flow requires board approval. That's in the bylaws." That's when we heard the distant whine of sirens. The procession was approaching. We all grew silent, solemn. Everyone except Karen, who was now furiously texting, probably summoning her army of rule-enforcing minions. A police motorcycle turned the corner, leading a hearse carrying Mr. Jenkins' flag-draped casket. Behind it, a line of vehicles trailed with headlights on and tiny American flags fluttering. It was moving. Emotional. And then Karen did something so deranged, it knocked the breath out of me. She walked into the middle of the street. With her hand raised like a traffic officer, she stood directly in front of the hearse. The driver hit the brakes. Cars behind it had to screech to a halt. She turned and shouted, "This procession is not HOA approved. You need to reroute. This is private property, and you're in violation of Section 7.2 of the community bylaws." The police officer on the motorcycle wheeled around and pulled up next to her. "Ma'am, you need to clear the road immediately. This procession has legal right-of-way." Karen didn't flinch. She held up her badge like she was flashing a federal warrant. "I am the president of this homeowners association, and we have not authorized this. I have the authority to deny access to unauthorized vehicles." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen was treating a man's funeral like an unregistered food truck. Another officer arrived as Mr. Jenkins' son stepped out of his car, his grief morphing into disbelief. The first officer spoke again, this time with the kind of authority that says, "I'm not asking twice. Ma'am, interfering with a funeral procession is a criminal offense in this state. You need to step aside now, or I will place you under arrest." Karen crossed her arms. "You can't arrest me for enforcing community guidelines on private property. I know my rights." That was it. The officer stepped off his bike, calmly pulled out his handcuffs, and informed her that she was being placed under arrest for obstruction, disorderly conduct, and failure to comply. Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do this! Do you know who I am? She shrieked as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. I'm the president of Oakwood Estates. The officer barely blinked. Ma'am, I don't care if you're the president of the United States. The law applies to everyone. They walked her to the patrol car while she fumed and raged. Her final shot screamed across the street. This is all your fault, Harrison. I'll have you evicted for this. I didn't say a word. The hearse began moving again. We stood with our hands over our hearts as it passed, doing our best to give Mr. Jenkins the honor he deserved. Karen's voice faded behind us, replaced by the gentle hum of engines, flapping flags, and the silence of a neighborhood that had finally seen what happens when unchecked pettiness meets the actual law. By the time the sun set that evening, the entire neighborhood knew what had happened. Karen Wilkinson, self-declared Queen of Oakwood Estates, had been arrested in the middle of the street for blocking a funeral procession. Some people saw it in person. Others watched it play out on the neighborhood group chat, where someone had uploaded a video within minutes. The caption read, "Karen versus the police, you won't believe who won." There were gifs. Memes. One neighbor even photoshopped Karen's face onto a stop sign. For a woman obsessed with image and control, the public humiliation was brutal. But it was only the beginning. The next morning, word got out that Karen had spent several hours in county lockup before her husband had to leave work to post her bail. The charges weren't just real, they were serious. Interfering with a funeral procession in our state carried a fine of up to $5,000 and possible jail time. Karen, who once fined a neighbor $50 for parking an inch over the sidewalk, now faced a legal system that didn't care about her laminated badge or her HOA bylaws. And worse for her, the association's insurance provider had already issued a statement. Since Karen had acted outside her legal authority, the HOA would not cover her legal expenses. 3 days later, the vice president of the HOA, Tom, a calm, fair man who tried to temper Karen's extremes in the past, called an emergency board meeting. No one expected what happened next. The clubhouse was packed. Residents lined the walls, some even standing outside the windows to hear. Tom opened the meeting with a steady voice, but the tension in the room was thick. In light of recent events, he began, and after consultation with legal counsel, the board has voted unanimously to remove Karen Wilkinson from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, cheering. It was the loudest, most unified noise Oakwood Estates had ever made. Karen sat in the corner, arms crossed, her jaw tight. She looked like she was made of stone, but anyone watching closely could see it, the slight tremble in her lip, the twitch in her brow. Reality was setting in. Tom continued once the room calmed. Additionally, the HOA will be issuing a formal apology to the Jenkins family for the disruption caused during Mr. Jenkins' funeral procession. We want to make clear that this community values respect and dignity above all else. Another round of applause followed. Karen stayed seated, her fingers digging into her clipboard like she wanted to hurl it across the room. Tom delivered the final blow. Lastly, we've confirmed with our legal team that the HOA's insurance policy will not apply in this matter. The actions taken were outside the scope of HOA authority. Ms. Wilkinson will be responsible for all legal costs associated with her arrest and defense. Karen stood abruptly. This is outrageous, she snapped. Everything I did was to protect this community. I was enforcing the bylaws. You can't just throw me out because I care more than the rest of you. Tom didn't even flinch. He held up the rulebook she'd quoted like scripture for years. Section 11.3 of our bylaws, he read, clearly states that board members may be removed for engaging in conduct detrimental to the community. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She had no response. But her career wasn't as silent. Within hours, the local real estate firm she worked for scrubbed her name from their listings. By the end of the week, a local blog had published a headline, HOA president arrested for blocking veteran's funeral. It went viral. Her photo, mid-shriek, handcuffed on the curb, was now floating across the internet as the latest symbol of suburban tyranny. Clients cancelled meetings. A planned speaking engagement at a housing conference was withdrawn. The consequences were professional, financial, and personal. As the crowd began to leave the meeting, Karen stormed toward the exit. She paused beside my chair and leaned in close. "I hope you're happy, Harrison," she whispered. "You've wanted this from the beginning." I looked up at her, calm and steady. "No, Karen," I said. "All I ever wanted was for you to treat people like people, not like rule violations. That was apparently too much to ask." She stared at me for a moment, searching for some final jab, some cutting remark. But for once, there was nothing. No comeback. No threat. Just silence. She left without another word. The door slammed behind her. And just like that, Oakwood Estates was finally free. No more mailbox patrols. No more drive-by citations. No more fear of Karen's clipboard knocking on your door. The reign of HOA terror was over. And all it took was one act of arrogance too far, one funeral she should have respected, and one set of handcuffs that finally reminded her: power in a community is earned, not printed at a copy shop and hung around your neck.